I suspect we're going to have a robust conversation. As I said, really, I'm going to keep my peripheral vision this way. At any point, if you'd like to put up your hand, make a comment, react, ask a question, please do so. All I'll ask is that you give us your first name, where you're from, and who your question, if it's a question, is directed at. All right? Whew. All right, guys. I'm a journalist myself. And I've worked in multiple newsrooms myself, so I can relate to a lot of what each of you have said about your own individual experiences. And it's interesting, all of us are saying none of us are surprised. And yet, if you look at the social media, there is this surprised, shock, horror, as one has said. Are we lying to ourselves as society, first of all? And then I want to get a sense from you, secondly, on the way that the media has reported on these incidents. Is it joining in the shock horror of social media practitioners, or is it actually reflecting back or reflecting at us why we are here? So what are we doing as the media? Are we just participating in the crazy denial, or are we actually saying to society, but hold on, all these things that we've just been talking about now, we shouldn't be surprised by where we are? I'll start with you, Justice.
Oh,
Sorry.
thank you, Siki. I knew I shouldn't sit next to you. Can I just say, the Alan Not Craig issue, I think Pete is absolutely right. I found it incredible the way we totally ignored what happened. Alan Not Craig didn't just marshal the resources of Vodacom to fight for years the Gosana Makate issue. He also wrote in his book that he came up with the idea.
There was a neat little story in there as well.
About how he came up with it, yeah.
But, you know, that he actually made up a story. And I think the point that is being made about how we hold people to account, who we hold to account is a big issue. I think the point that was being made is absolutely crucial in reflecting, and I think one of the questions you will or were asked us to answer was, what role can we play? The news editor job, you have to compile the diary, you have to ask people questions, We need to not think just about who's the editor of the title, but who's the news editor, and what are their abilities to ask those tough questions.
And who are the gatekeepers, certainly.
Who are the gatekeepers and so forth. There was a time when people would say, oh, you know, the subs changed my story. But I think if you talk about institutional change, maybe the institution needs to change fundamentally from inside and how those processes work. Have we done enough? I think in some places, yes. I don't agree with Pete that fundamentally all traditional media has not transformed. I think there has been huge changes in many places, but I think there have been many failures in many other places, and I don't excuse those that I work for and write for. But I think the point made about the narrative and how we frame those, I think it's a sad day that in South Africa, the past 2 weeks, the name Alan Not Craig has not come up. And it's what's going on here. If it was Pete Rampedi, he would still be hounded, and there would be a journalist outside waiting to doorstop him and ask him, what are you going to apologize, and so forth. And I think that when we are seen overtly to hold some people to account and not others, the optics of it and then the fundamental reasons behind it become questioned, and that's all of us in trouble. I can't remember what your...
You've just responded to it, actually. Angela?
I think, for me, it is about the political economy of the media, which then is about issues of ownership, where the money comes from, who's being paid, who pays, what they get. And again, I don't think it's productive to focus on individuals only, because, so your rehabilitation idea might be interesting, but I think that is the mode in which we now work. We rehabilitate individual racists, and individual racists put themselves up for rehabilitation. It's the same in other forms of violation, whether it is misogyny or homophobia or xenophobia. People come out and they go, oh, I didn't mean to, I'm so terribly sorry, and it becomes this kind of 1990s flashback. Bad, debased TRC. If you cry, then you are rehabilitated, and you're one of us, and you've shown contrition. And that's all part of the spectacle, which I think is also part of this kind of post-apartheid nation, of being in a space, and I think that social media conversation is part of that, where people are very quick to do this dialectic distance. I am not a racist, right? Which is the moment you say that, you're like, where could this possibly go that's productive? It's a blank statement. It's like something that you say in a bad church service that you no longer believe in, but you go because the parents are watching, so you have to go, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. But you don't believe this. It's a ritual. And I think we are in danger of becoming ritualists, right? But as for that political economy, I agree with Pitt that there are old patterns, but I think they also align with old networks in new times. I think in 22 years, we have made assumptions about relations to the state. That in the early years of post-apartheid South Africa, our relations as intellectuals were supportive often, before critical. And I continue to hear this when people invest in the nation state. For me, the nation state is a horrible trap. It's, you can't decolonize inside the nation state in its current formation. The nation state in its current formation is a Westphalian phenomenon that we inherited through colonialism. It was a direct response to colonial conquest. We need to start thinking beyond the nation state. So people invested in the nation state in the 1990s. It was often supportive. You see this in the capitulation by university intellectuals to programs, to OBE, to green papers, to white papers. You saw it in the media. So now, 22 years later, our relationship to the state can no longer be quite so supportive because we don't like the people in the state and what they're doing. So now our position must slip back into what it was in 1989. And people who in 1989 were against the state can now re-inhabit positions of being against the state and not realize that the political economy of the state, the world, all of that has shifted. And old rituals do not apply in new times. But old networks can work in new times. And I think it's interesting that in South Africa, we haven't talked about a backlash. A backlash by well-meaning, liberal, white South Africans who believe themselves to be against the racist narrative, but actually are deeply and possessively invested in whiteness as rightness. And their critique of black excess is not understood to be should be reconfigured as a critique of political power's excess. It doesn't have to be racialized. You can critique the president of the country, you can critique the government of the day. Why it continues to be invested in these absurd racialized narratives goes back to my point. The use of race to make sense of the world, as opposed to looking at how race is used by others to make sense of the world.
The point you just made now, I'm curious because when you watch interactions between, let's say there's one of these race-based stories or a corruption story, and let's say it's about the president, and you find that the liberal white person will be like, oh, of course this is corruption and we must all condemn it, and why aren't black people condemning it? And it almost at times you get the sense that it places certain good blacks, I want to put that in huge inverted commas, in a corner, because on the one hand you get the sense that you can taste the racism in the comment itself, but you are anti-corruption. Why is it that it seems in this country, in our narrative, black people cannot be anti-corruption and anti-racism at the same time, that we almost thought to either be the one or the other? What's happened?
Two quick things. My sense is that often people don't have the tools, and this is partly, my analogy, and it's a bad analogy, but I like it because I'm addicted to it, is that if there were some biological threat, some biohazard threatening the body politic, we might all talk about it, but eventually we're going to be listening to epidemiologists and healthcare specialists about how to deal with this. But on issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, just because people have sex, people have a gender or think they do, and people think they have a race in a certain way, everybody thinks they can talk about this. Now, my problem is, if you don't know what you're talking about, your conversation might not be meaningful or it might not be productive. And so it becomes the talking cure. So when in those moments people have to intervene and say it's not an either-or between anti-racism and anti-corruption, it's often a lack of tools, because how do you speak through this, both for the person wanting to and for the person who has to hear it? But to pick up on Justice and Pitt's points about, and this is the point about political economy, those questions and answers and arguments and discussions in a newsroom or in a soapies production house or in a television production house are often had in spaces where you have to remain vaguely polite with the people around you, because nobody wants to go to work and consistently be unpleasant and be the subject of unpleasantness, right? So it's one of those things that we're in a free South Africa, we must all be nice to one another. When half the time these are people you would organize your life never to have to socialize with, right? You would never invite these people into your house, you wouldn't expose your children to them, because you happen to work. Alienation of labor is subsumed under this politeness narrative. So in those moments, it's often you have to decide, do I have the energy to have this argument about the word non-white again? I've been having it for 20 years of my life. I've been having it with these people for 5 years of my life. It's the reason so many of us constantly change jobs. Because it's like, I've been talking to these people about the same thing for 5 years, I'm done, right? But at the same time, there's also, I think, the pressure, and it's an economic pressure, to have a job, to remain in a space and not have the kinds of the stuff that's never spoken about, which is making the workplace uncomfortable, is okay for some of us. But when we make the workplace uncomfortable by asking tough questions, we often get sidelined. It becomes what Mahmoud Mamdani calls the braai circle, where the real decisions are made outside, off campus, and when you come to the meeting, the committee is stacked.
Yeah.
So you then have to fight an ideological battle that gets won by numbers. Now, we know in this country, when that happens in Parliament, we're all terribly distressed by it. They're using majoritarianism over logic. Meanwhile, in institutions that are dedicated and foundationally exist because of logic, this happens in faculty meetings, this happens in department meetings, this happens in research clusters. Why do we assume it's not going to happen by force of numbers or by other rituals in newsrooms, in the production house when we're looking at the script and doctoring it? These are the everyday forms of racism that we choose to respond to or not to respond to. Not often because we're politically shy, but often because it's just more work. And as I said recently,
exhausting.
We don't get danger pay. Danger pay, the apartheid phenomenon, if you were white and you taught in a black township, you got extra money for the risk. Black people, women, homosexuals, or those who side with those struggles don't get extra pay to have to go into a meeting and educate people who often don't want to be educated. Because the professional codes kick in and people go, this is how we've always done it, we have a deadline to meet, we can't have a 20-minute discussion about this. Which is not what you would say to a surgeon who says to you, half your leg is gangrenous and we need to cut it within the next 2 hours or you will die. You don't go, well, let's have a confab on Twitter about this. But on racism, sexism, homophobia, we consistently think everybody has the democratic right to participate, regardless of their knowledge, their expertise, their understanding, or their sophistication. And that, I think, is part of the problem.
Khadija?
Gosh, I think, Siki, I've already forgotten what your original question was.
Narrative.
But, so, a couple of weeks ago, like I said, we're sort of traversing this very interesting moment in, I think, our history at the moment. And a couple of weeks ago, the EFF, of course, launched its manifesto, and the DA, in its characteristic bombastic style, released a statement telling Julius, these are the 10 things you need to apologize for, right? It was the most audacious statement you've ever read. So on Twitter, I began a hashtag that was meant to be, to poke fun at the DA a bit, and it was called DA Say Sorry, and so people were contributing to this discussion about things the DA should say sorry for. Some of it was very funny, some of it was serious, some of it was just like the DA should say sorry for its own existence. Not helpful. And so I then turned that into a quick sort of what we call a social media roundup for the Daily Vox. And around this, it was, I can't remember whether it was around the same time that the Opes Cafe incident happened.
It was close to.
It was
yeah,
very close
yeah.
to it, right? At the same time, also over that weekend, I think we published an editorial because we were struggling actually with how exactly do we cover this story, right? And then we wrote this editorial that did fantastically well, was read very, very widely, which basically said that sure, this guy may have been an asshole, but he's not being oppressive to white people. He's not being systematically oppressive by refusing to tip a server at this restaurant. So, this. So both these posts were published over the weekend, and and Monday was the holiday day, wasn't it? So Tuesday morning, we're in our diary meeting, and we're really busy. It's a short week. We're trying to sort out our priorities for the week, and my cell phone rings, my personal phone rings, and somebody asks, I need to speak to someone at the Daily Vox. So I said, well, okay, you can speak to me, sir. Do you have a central office, or do you just exist somewhere? So I said, we do have a central office, but who am I speaking to?
Yeah.
Why do you need to know this? And he then launched into this absolute diatribe about how we need to be held to a higher order. We need to be accountable for the things that we publish, and he feels that it is absolutely revolting that we get to publish whatever we want.
Oh.
And he feels that, we need to be held to account for these things, right? So it was the most startling conversation I'd had, because first of all, I wasn't prepared for it. And then he's shouting down the phone at me. So, and I was confused for a few moments as to, the first question I wanted to ask, but where did you get my number from? He was very, very angry. So in the middle of all of, of him going on, I said, look, I'm in a meeting at the moment. Would you mind instead sending me an email with these thoughts? This is my email address, and we'll take it from there. But please don't shout at me this way. I was not shouting! All right? This was a white man, right, who was obviously very, very angered by what we had published. Because it went against a certain kind of expected narrative. And I think increasingly there is a kind of conflict that emerges when the narrative sort of diverts from the expectation. And this is, I think, the moment that we are negotiating right now.
Isn't that part of the problem that's been raised, though, as well, that the media has created that expectation because, to a large extent, certain people are heard, certain people are referred to in certain ways as opposed to others being referred to in certain ways. So if last week we'd suddenly said that Alan Knott Craig is a liar and a crook, you might have gotten the exact same phone call, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So it points exactly to to everything that we are saying, but I think that it also points to what Angelo was saying as well. Is that this kind of I'm using the word crisis, I think, very liberally. I actually want to think it's also a crisis of white liberalism in South Africa, and how it relates to other people, and how it relates to the political spectacle, how it also relates to the political class of the country. All of these things are being challenged, I think, in various ways. And we're seeing a lot of to and fro, and it's not neat. These things never happen in a neat way.
And I think social media has also, in a sense, taken away a lot of the neatness. People who before would have not been able to publish their thoughts as freely as they can now, certainly
Absolutely,
do.
but at the same time, I think that I think we've spoken a lot about social media and the fact that people who previously would be ignored, are able to voice their opinions, are able to contribute in some ways to the political spectacle. But I think that if we are indeed going to be talking about a media that is intrinsic to democracy, as it should be,
Yeah.
then I think then we have to also address the fact that media in South Africa does not speak to many, many, many people. I'm talking about mainstream national media. Where are the voices from the rural areas of the Cape Town? The country seems to be contained to Joburg and Cape Town, right?
And sometimes Durban.
Yeah, shame, Durban's
Sometimes,
Durban's like the stepchild of the family. So I think that these, we have to, I think, importantly address who we don't speak to. And also, I think that, and I know that I run the Daily Vox, but I'm acutely aware of the fact that the people who live on social media are not an accurate reflection of everybody who live in South Africa. The fact that we have such poor internet penetration and the cost of data means that we don't often have an accurate reflection of what is happening or what is felt in the streets. So I think that this is where journalism is supposed to be done. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be going out and actually finding out, testing what are people's reactions. I think there's a couple of hands.
I will come to you. Let me just give Pete a chance to do a response back, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay. Coming back to the issue of the narratives, I'll go back to the issue of Alan that you just referred to now. The reality of the matter is that that kind of denialism in the media is so racialized that I remember in one of the Sunday papers last week, in one of the captions had described Alan as dishonorable. He's not a liar, he's dishonorable. And in one of the paragraphs, the story said he had allowed his subordinate to lie for him in court. He didn't lie in court through a subordinate. He allowed a subordinate to lie for him. So it's that kind of racialized kind of narratives. But the reality of the matter also is that in the newsrooms or the South African media, it's not just race only. There's also the problem of not covering the poor rural people. They are treated as if they don't exist. We have challenged that as the FJT on several occasions, where, for example, I remember raising concerns about the media. They had sent almost all their journalists to PE to cover Christopher Panioto's case. And this person had killed one person. He's white, he's middle class, he's urban. He has killed his wife. And white tears mattered the most. It's death, And then a few days or few weeks later, another guy in Limpopo, a rural guy in Zebediela, kills 4 of his kids. They're black. And the media never sent anybody there. And the subtext there was that black lives didn't matter. They don't matter. It's just statistics. The same thing happened when there were fires in Cape Town. The media went there, almost all of them. Some of them even crossed live. It's properties of the rich. This fire is coming closer. I feel so hot. Cape Town is burning. All of us had to care because properties of the rich and properties of white people, were under threat. Day and night. I had never seen the South African media crossing live from, a place of fire. Almost every day there are shack fires in Alexander, in Zandspruit. They won't even tell you who the victims were. Just got 5 black people died there. 5 people were killed. They don't care. They won't even say it's these people. They won't even take time to go and interview the victims' families. You just treat it as statistics. They don't care. You are black. You are poor, and you are not in the middle class. You're not part of the middle class. And when we challenge this kind of thing, the usual justification has been that, we're scaling down, we don't have resources, we're operating in a difficult environment, we've got budget cuts, which is not necessarily true, because some of them, they're based in Joburg. They've got offices in Pretoria, but they'd rather close an office in Limpopo, in Mpumalanga, in the Northwest. Why? It's rural, poor black people. You don't care about them. That's where the problem is. And they also try to normalize, as I said earlier, abnormal situations. I'll give you an example. We had the government or the police or the state killing 36 miners in Marikan, black. Broad daylight, kill them. The media, while to their credit, covered the tragedy. After that, we never had many people, especially white people, for example, organizing Zuma's fall marches that won't affect white people, the middle class, and the